Like and subscribe right now, or else this will be in your bed tonight. r/ask Reddit by Planet Reddit. Professors and university employees of Reddit. What behind the scenes campus drama went on that students never knew about? In our chemistry department a few years back, a grad student who was failing started poisoning another graduate student they worked with closely by putting carcinogens in their foods and drinks. Colorless, odorless, flavorless. Thanks to his chemistry knowledge, he was eventually caught and I'm not sure what happened to him. Thrown out for sure, perhaps arrested. Another year a grad student pushed another student down a flight of steps to try to kill them. Chemists are crazy. Mental note: be kind to chemists. Tip: also be nice to biochemists. We also have access to a bunch of fun diseases to put into your coffee. Hey Mark, how's it going? I'm culturing a super bacteria. You know, I always knew you were so smart and handsome. You've already eaten some, you bastard. 2 professors arrested for meth production. One for murdering his wife with lab supplies. Another stepped down quietly for embezzlement. And that's how we replaced half our chemistry department in a year. I'm noticing a trend between chemistry and murder in this post. We're insane. I saw in an email a few weeks ago that a graduate student out west was trying to poison his roommate with thallium. We're insane. Backs away slowly. A professor was hired to start a research center/institute. Got paid a lot of money and came in with tenure. He was ducking weird to begin with. But as time went on it became apparent that he wasted all the funds intended for starting the center. Nothing was happening but the accounts were diminishing. The whistleblower hotline was provided with a bunch of data that strongly suggested he was funneling a lot of that money to a company owned in part by his brother, in addition to a lot of blatant and casual misuse of funds, buying personal and convenient stuff for himself and staff. Things started heating up and they called him in for a hearing about it. The very next day we found an indignant letter announcing his resignation and accusing the entire department and college of unethical behavior slipped under the door. He skipped out in the middle of the night leaving a big pile of deliberately damaged equipment in his office. The university didn't pursue him. I believe it was because they were in the middle of a scandal involving faculty and students in another department and just didn't want to hear about it. Students were completely unaware. Edit. Neglected to mention that the other department's scandal revolved around alleged faculty misconduct with minors off campus. Did he find another job? I'm guessing he did not ask anyone to write him recommendations. At his brother's company maybe? Could be a good gig. I hear that company's quarterly numbers were way up. In the English department, one of the professors got arrested for domestic violence, divorced his wife, then got another English professor pregnant and eventually married her, and they all saw each other at department meetings. Super awkward. Edit to clarify, the husband and original wife were both professors. He had an affair with another English professor. Wife found out and there was a major fight. Cops were called. He was arrested for DV but I believe the charges were dropped. He filed for divorce, moved in with the other professor, got her pregnant, and he and the ex were still fighting over child support and alimony when I left. I was the pregnant professor's Tay, but I was definitely team original wife. Either this is a coincidence or we went to the same school. It would be super messed up if you went to different schools. I worked for universities for about 13 years. It would not be at all unlikely. Your profs are all just people too. I was a professorial assistant to the Italian department and one of my favorite professors did a showing of a very famous Italian film Swept Away on a weekend. This was an outside of class activity, which no one was required to attend, at a college with college-age students. Just we don't have time to watch this in class, so we'll watch it over the weekend in the auditorium. The movie in question would be considered controversial by American standards, but Italian film standards it is also controversial, but considered a pretty important film for anyone studying film. It deals with some pretty intense issues involving dynamics between men and women, wealthy and poor as well as, depending on your interpretation, a rape scene. I was working in the department when we did this movie showing and so I got a front row view of it blowing up. Apparently some freshmen, who are 18 years old, attended the screening and complained to their parents, who complained to the school. The school decided the best option was to fire my professor. The Italian department went to bat for him. reminding the school that adult students attended the screening voluntarily. The school knew they couldn't get away with firing him specifically for that. So at the end of the quarter they revoked his contract renewal. He was supposed to come back the next year for lifestyle choices that conflict with university standards. No one outside of the Italian department knew what happened. Professor was there one quarter and gone the next with no warning whatsoever. Wow, you have to be some kind of stupid to fire a gay man for reasons of lifestyle choices. That's like a guaranteed lawsuit. The irony of a college doing that of all places. The longer you spend in any field you realize that most people are idiots just kinda winging it. The worst part is that in the real world these people are making decisions and the safety is off. It's kinda terrifying. When I was going through my PhD program, a buddy of mine put his professor die on him. Young guy, in his 40s, got hit by a car. Boom. Not so fun fact, when a professor dies, their grants go away. If a grad student is on the verge of finishing, just writing up their results, they can sometimes hop to another lab and get by. My friend, however, was only in his second year. He had to start over with a new project in a new lab. Essentially lost 2 years of his life on a project that yielded absolutely nothing. Woo. Grad school. So uplifting. No chance of a weekend at Bernie's type deal. Modern problems require 1980s classic movie solutions. That happened recently at my university as well. A couple of my fellow grad students were basically made lab homeless as their professor died in a freak horseback riding accident. She was pretty young, so it was quite tragic for everyone involved. One of our male English professors was being stalked by a female student, to the point he had to get a restraining order against her. The only reason my class knew was because she saw him in the hallway, entered our classroom and made a huge scene the first day of class, and security had to be called to make her leave. After that, the door was always locked for that class and whoever was in the back row were scouters to let in late students. He also had to cancel class to go to court for the situation at least once. Any background info to this? I'm intrigued. I'm supposing it was cleared they had no sexual relation, but I'd like to know how this even started. Not OP, but one of my professors had a mentally ill student who adored her until she failed him because he hadn't turned much of anything in all term, including the final essay, and then he did a complete 180 from "You're the best teacher I've ever had. You're inspiring. etc to you dumb beach, you don't know anything, you're just out to get me. I'm going to kill you for being such a beach to me." She got a restraining order. He violated it, waited outside her office and started screaming obscenities when he saw her, and was arrested. I was in her class a couple months after he was released from prison. We did the same thing, the door was locked at all times and we had to let stragglers and bathroom users in. Class was held in the shitty classroom that no one ever used, and the location wasn't posted anywhere online. Even as a registered student, I was only shown location TBD and she emailed us the week before class started to give us the room and building number. It was some spooky shit. Edit. A word. I've got a good one for ya. A teacher I'll call Mrs. W I had many semesters ago was a sweet but stern older lady. I'm talking probably 65 due to having some memories of the 50s she'd share with us. But she looked fairly good for her age. She's been teaching there over 30 years. Too. Anyway, my boyfriend had her the previous semester. He was in her night class, and she had asked my boyfriend to walk her out to her car because a student was stalking her. I thought it was incredibly sweet she chose well out of all the students there. One day after my class ended, Mrs. W and I were talking and I had mentioned the incident, just wondering if it's actually dangerous to walk out to your car at night because I wanted to take a night class. It turns out, this guy student of hers had kept dropping by her office and trying to talk to her, and she started to feel uneasy. He tried asking her a bunch of sexual questions and brought in a porno mag. Who has magazine porn anymore? And she reported it to the school. He tried telling her he loved her, though they had no friendship or connection, as her class wasn't designed to be that way at all, and she was extremely professional and old-fashioned. She acted terrified when she was telling me this. The student shot himself about a month after the incident. Our heads of department or course directors would purposely keep dragging students, the act of pulling a student through their studies, Even though they'd fail most classes, they'd purposely grade the student just above a pass even though the content of work was astonishingly bad, because if they left or dropped out it'd look bad on the course's stats and dropout rate. Not to mention the university not getting the student loan money. From there, of course statistics would be ridiculously high for that particular degree, so they'd then sell this to prospective students and parents. This is currently still going on. Source: I'm a lecturer at a university and yes, it disgusts me. Edit: I'm a UK based lecturer, not from the US. I bet this hits close to home at lots of places. Any ideas for a way out? Raise standards, but do it extra nicely? It really does. On multiple levels. It's across multiple courses, so that's tough. I've even sat in on joint marking. Seen a student's work is really bad and another member of staff saying, "Oh, we can't mark them too harshly. It'll look bad on our statistics," makes me sick because it feels like it's just a numbers game to them and not the education. Which is why I love to teach. I think having external markers come in to check work and actual academic marking would help dramatically, because they could go to independent bodies to say there's tampering going on etc, but the university won't allow it because they're wanting to save money, which is, of course, above my pay grade. It's a tough situation all around. Sadly the norm. I worked in an institute that at the end of the year the head was calling students who hadn't been in over 6 months, telling them to come in to complete their qualification. Higher pass rates equals maintain government funding. They also claimed at graduation that 90% of students ended up working in the industry or going on to further education. The number was more likely 5%. Currently it's at head of one of our research institutes, and few of his colleagues somehow award themselves about $1 million each as a bonus. In my country it takes about 70 years of work on AVG salary to get that money. Also the same prof possibly forged some data in paper 10 years ago. Who knows how it's gonna end, but sure more dirt is being pulled on other PPL as well. Edit: I'm not disclosing my location nor the names because it is still being investigated. Also to clear some possible confusion. The money stuff is a rumor I heard from multiple sources. They don't know each other. Likely nothing illegal here. No fraud or theft or whatever. They probably just get the money as a end of year bonus they awarded themselves. B: the paper is real deal ATM and is being investigated by ethics committee. C: I'm not personally involved in any of this. I'm a different department. While I am just a grad student, I have a contract with university and I am university employee, just in case someone says that I am just grad student. Bro, I hope you are keeping records of all this. For posterity, not for blackmailing those sobs. Definitely not that. How I am just some poor grad student, I'm not getting involved in this. D: as far as I know the money stuff was not illegal, they had some big grants, so it's more in the ethics area than legal, but I don't really know all the details. The paper is, as far as I know, being blamed on the student who did the work, but there are rumors that he complained to someone that he was being forced to alter the data. But who knows? The prof is quite big name, so I'm rather skeptical that it will end him. How would he even be able to cover up something like that? Oh yeah, I've done a great job. Len, just go ahead and award myself a sum that's probably several dozen times my salary. I will call it a research grant. My PI professor for grad school had his lab raided by the FBI. This happened long before I joined. Apparently, one of his first or second class of grad students in the 80s 90s decided that they wanted to use lab resources to brew some meth. Very easy to do with the equipment we have. From what I am told, this student would stay late in lab after others had left to get this done. In Breaking Bad style, he fences his drugs to some distributor and thought that was the end of it. The purity of his drugs was enough that they were able to trace it back from the streets to him and the lab. A sting operation shut down the lab while the dust settled, and my professor was cleared of all wrongdoing, since none of this was under his direct control. And all campus resources were being misused by the student. State Intelligence Bureau told the professor that it was the largest and purest operation they had seen in the state at this time. Being caught because your product is too good is quite ironic. Not sure how they'd be able to tell which lab though. If it's pure, the only information you have is they used pro equipment and know how to do it properly, not which lab made it. In the state we are in, we are one of the 2 top labs. That definitely makes it much easier to find out. Join our community Discord, link in description. Prominent professor was sleeping with his students. Actually, he met his wife that way, and then had a huge issue with dating other students after getting married. Lawsuits were threatened. He resigned and moved 3,000. Edit: this was exaggerated by about 2,000 miles away very quickly. No news, no public info released. It was all just known through the grapevine of staff. Edit: it was in the Midwest, but it seems this happens at every school based on comments. No, I'm not going to say where. One of the biology professors allegedly did this too while he was married. Eventually got one of the grad students pregnant and ended up leaving his wife and kids to marry the grad student. That somehow absolved him of any misconduct because they were in a legal relationship instead of being in a teacher-student type dynamic. Other than feeling bad for the prof's old family, I felt particularly bad for the grad student's fiance who had given up everything and moved halfway across the country to be with her in the first place. He ended up, understandably, getting depressed and ended up taking a leave of absence from his own studies before supposedly moving home. He ended up, understandably, getting depressed and ended up taking a leave of absence from his own studies before supposedly moving home. I was expecting suicide. That's a relative relief. You mean, aside from the normal infighting between factions, character assassination carried out in formal language at review promotion tenure committee meetings, grad student poaching, running crying to a dean, etc. This makes me want a Veep meets Game of Thrones show about a university faculty. I think that the stakes are small enough that it might feel a tiny bit sad. Edit: yup, seen The Office, seen Parks and Rec. There are no stakes so small that somebody won't lose their shit over it. I think students would be surprised just how much drama happens. I am talking everything from major drama like lawsuits that universities have kept quiet or EO complaints to colleagues beaching at each other because one thought the other one rolled her eyes at the other one. I just went to a faculty meeting that was so tense and angry that I legitimately wanted to leave the room, and it was over a small wording difference of opinion in a policy that literally does not matter because it is departmental and not university-wide, so it's going to get struck down anyway. Anyway, sometimes I am happy to go to class or meet with students in my office because that is the fun part of the job and usually drama free until the last week of classes when everyone starts hustling for a higher grade. Having peeked behind the scenes as college staff, I was definitely shocked at how much drama there is. It amazed me that professors that I had once taken classes with and respected could act worse than high school students. The levels of jealousy, resentment, backstabbing, and outright lying deceit are absurd. My dad had a strategy to get out of faculty meetings quickly. Bring a pizza and load it up with raw onions. Combine it with cigarette breath. This was the 70s and 80s, and everyone will want to get it over with as quickly as possible. Schedule meetings at the end of the day on Fridays and make sure there are no chairs in the room, standing room only. Meetings will be real quick. Night shift janitor made some really good moonshine. Some of the professors and grad students would leave cash in our top desk drawers when we left work, and the next day, a mason jar of handmade shine would be waiting there. He's since moved on from that department, but was good people. It would have been really weird if someone didn't know about that system, left some cash in their desk, showed up the next day, find out they've been robbed, but the moonshine fairy had left them a gift. I used to be a custodian at a prominent university, and one of the TAs in the art department would routinely leave her studio a pigsty and then assured her students not to sweat the mess. We're just giving the janitor something to do. A number of students complained about her sense of entitlement, and she was rejected for a professorship for calling me a janitor instead of the proper nomenclature, custodian. You can easily judge the character of a man by how he treats those who can do nothing for him. Malcolm S. Forbes. That quote, or variations of it, go way back before Forbes. Try Samuel Johnson and Dear Abby. Actually, the best version comes from Ann Landers. The best index to a person's character is A. How he treats people who can't do him any good, and B. How he treats people who can't fight back. I worked at a large university, and right before I started, the longtime dean of the school went on sabbatical. I didn't think anything of it until 2 months later when I found out that the university forced him to take time off because he blew almost all of the school's budget on fancy dinners with donors. We're talking like $1,000 plus on alcohol heavy meals. Showed up to official university events high off cocaine. And kept a second admin assistant as essentially his sex slave. He had a private bathroom with a shower installed in his office. He sent the school into a major budget crisis and was a PR disaster waiting to happen. It was a huge mess. The acting dean who stepped in got a lot of shit for how much damage control she had to do. Ultimately he returned a few years later just as a part-time faculty member. But still, totally wild. Cocaine and sex slaves for the college dean? Can't say I am surprised. But how the duck can he blow the entire school budget and not get fired is beyond me. Ducking colleges, man. People pay so much money to get a degree from these places, and you read this thread and realize the place they get the degree from is just an absolute shitstorm of baffinery. It used to be said of politics on the university campus that it was the worst of all kinds of politics because the stakes were so small. Charles Frankel. Source: work at a state university. There's more to the story, obviously. Whoa, really? That seems like a lot on its own. I was a grad student in a major university. The department pretty much all loathed one another, and the professors had multiple alliances that were probably more complex than any game of Civ you'll play. At one point in time, a group of professors had aligned to overthrow the dean, and they were so successful in doing so that the dean wasn't fired. They were demoted to department secretary. It was brutal. I had a colleague who had people on their doc committee get into an argument and refuse to sign off on anything they did. Not because of the quality of the work, but because the professors hated each other. They were demoted to department secretary. Did they proceed to give the former dean lots of meaningless tasks to do? What prompted the overthrow? The dean was moving the department in a new direction, which meant trying to toss out some of the older faculty. Older faculty didn't enjoy the pressure and revolted, with the apparent catalyst being the dean giving a handout during the meeting of all of the older faculty salaries whether this is what we could save speech. They stuck around as secretary for maybe a year. I don't know if they were given lots of requests or not. They were pretty much persona non grata to most of the department after that, even their allies. The professors had multiple alliances that were probably more complex than any game of Civ you'll play. This has been true of every large department I've ever dealt with. I work for a prominent university in Japan. My Japanese colleagues tend to follow all rules very strictly and blindly follow manuals. One day an American professor had to rush to the US to see his dying mother. The staff members of class operations called him as he was grieving, asking him to still teach classes and review reports. Obviously, the lack of empathy and inflexibility led the professor to take his bags and work for another school. Students never knew the true reason why he stopped teaching. I was kept from saying goodbye to my Korean children in an English hagwon years ago, after I was fired for a serious kidney disease requiring hospitalization. I made signs saying goodbye and held them up across the street as they left the building. I didn't care. I was not letting 10-year-olds think I didn't like them anymore and just walked out of there without saying anything about how much they meant to me. I also very quickly ran into the kindergarten to tell them I was going back to America, and I would never forget them. My boss was a bitch who wanted to drag me out of the local hospital while I was hooked up to an IV. The doctor persuaded her it might permanently ruin my kidney. No regrets. Those kids needed to know it was never about them. I like them no matter what the crappy boss did. Graduate students are treated like trash. We're cheap labor so the tenured professors can keep publishing without doing anything, and the professors looking for tenure can get the publications they need. Basically, the entire publish or perish culture in academia is really toxic. Unless you get lucky with a nice advisor, you're screwed. Also, university administration cares nothing for graduate students. At my school, our president announced a cash appreciation gift to every staff person making under a certain amount. Every graduate student on campus thought that included us as well, because to every logical person, we're staff eligible for benefits and work full-time. No, we're only students when it's convenient for the university and makes their numbers look good, and considered staff only because we're getting paid barely above the poverty line. At least I get health insurance. Source: grad student who once was all bright-eyed and excited about academia. It's a toxic place. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for 3 videos a day.